You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Joining us now on the Business Communicators is Chris Brogan, the president of Chris Brogan Media, and he offers brand strategy and digital content and presence management to help businesses of all sizes, including Disney, Coke, Google, GM, Microsoft, and so many more. And he is a New York Times bestselling author of 9 books. He's got his 10th on the way, The Bat Pack, which is also a podcast that you could check out. And we love that you're a podcaster. We love having fellow podcasters on our podcast. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Austin. Glad to be here with the wonderful communicators. I feel like we're going to communicate.
That's the plan. Hopefully we can, effectively communicate and our audience can enjoy it. But, when I was doing research for this episode and have you on, first off, we're really excited to have you on, but your website, there's a section in there that I absolutely love. And it says biographies are really weird things. You basically have to, pimp yourself up and act all pompous and important and make sure that people know that you're worth it. And you say that you're a very approachable and nice guy. And I think we can attest to that early on in this podcast. But why was communications the right fit for you?
First off, I never tend to put myself in that bucket directly. And for a reason some of you might actually understand and accept. Sometimes you get treated as like you're sitting at the little table at Thanksgiving or something. If you say I'm in communications, they think you couldn't possibly think about strategy, or you couldn't possibly understand, business applications and all that. So I call myself a business advisor, but really the tools I use more than any are media tools, communications tools. I teach, PR and marketing structure and strategy. So that's right off the bat. I'm already like, this is my wolf's clothing, because I don't want them to think I'm just that. So I think that when it comes to explaining how people should interact, though, there's a sociology lesson, right? We were taught, maybe starting as early on as the 60s, but for sure through the 80s, that we're all supposed to use we statements. And it's all supposed to be our big, massive empire, even if you're a company with 2 people in it. And it's all supposed to be very, removed, sterile kind of language. I think that that's changed dramatically over the last handful of years, and most certainly has over the last year. And I think companies are going to have to learn really quick how to be a lot more human when they connect with people. So I was just there I'm kind of a human hipster. I wanted to do it 10 years before everyone else thought it was cool.
I love the term human hipster. And, I think that one of the things that you do incredibly well on social media and through your website is personal branding. And you kind of alluded to it a moment ago by saying we. And there are so many people that I speak with in the communication space that are afraid to brag on themselves. And you actually wrote an article on July 5th on your website, so people can go check it out. But people are afraid, I think, to brag on themselves and let other people know, the good work that they're doing. And, I even find that in interviews, you try to give the team credit, and there's a time and a place to give a team credit. But at other points, you've got to say, look, no, I did this. I'm proud of this. This is something that I accomplished. When it comes to personal branding, how have you found, what strategies have you found effective to help elevate your brand?
I do my very best to make it about the people that I'm serving. That's always, always, always the language in my head. It's always about the people I get the opportunity to serve. So the person I portray is the person I am. I figured that out early. Like if I could just be a slightly shinier version of me, then that's better than me trying to be somebody I'm not. And so when I say things like I get a chance to hang out with this princess, we interviewed a princess from Sierra Leone the other day. Who didn't know she was a princess. It's this crazy story. She was adopted. She finds out, she pays for one of those private eye things. She gets found out she's a princess. She has like this crazy experience with it. And I always think to myself, well, I'm surely not a princess. So it's easy to stay humble. Kendrick Lamar taught me that. He said, first you should sit down and then you should be humble. But then what I learned was that when you try to talk about yourself, boy, you're going to earn a really short amount of somebody's attention span. But if I can give people things they can do and things they can think about, if I can make all of my accolades about some way in which other people were able to do something cool, then you can talk about yourself endlessly, because all you're doing is you're just equipping other people for success. The kind of self-promotion that blows is when you're just walking around talking about your awards. I mean, I would love to say I walk into pizza places and go, I'm a New York Times bestselling author. Could I please have that slice? But it doesn't work that way. It turns out no one's as impressed with me as myself. So I should probably do stuff to be helpful to other people.
I love it.
That's great advice. I remember hearing all about the influencers walking in. Hey, I should get this food for free because I'm going to take a picture of it. And I think what you just said is absolutely key about just being humble. I was actually listening to one of your past podcasts about the Savannah Bananas and the yellow suit and the guy that was really full of energy. And then you had a guy who's doing figurines and as you put it, nerding out. And I'm looking at behind you, you have just a whole array of hobbies or interest. And it's kind of going back, how did it's communications and how do you tie all of your hobbies or your interest into a single focus?
Well, so when I do a video show, a weekdays video show called The Backpack Show right now. I've had a podcast on and off since 2005. My first one was called Fat Guy Gets Fit because I figured as long as I never really get fit, then I could do the show forever. And one of the things I've learned from way back when is just that, you know what people really love to talk about? The thing they're into. And so, for instance, I always say about our show, we never want to interview marketing turd heads. There's so many podcasts where you can interview all those people. There's so many places for Gary Vaynerchuk to come and talk and do what he wants to do. Love Gary, but he's got all the stages. He's good. So we're looking for insight from unusual places. So in that process, what we keep finding, without intending to make a theme for the show, everyone who goes their own way, everyone who makes their own game, everyone who listens to the critics for 5 seconds and says, that's a horrible thing, I'm just going to do it anyway, they're who win. We interview Sir Mix-a-Lot. He says, I never thought I would be with a symphony orchestra doing My Baby Got Back with a bunch of people with strings and cellos and stuff behind him. He said, I never thought it. And then what we find over and over again is that this kind of stuff, like loving comic books or, having a absolutely unhealthy relationship with Batman, I think it's useful because that's how we find who people really are. Very few people are sitting out there anxious to talk about their golf game, right? So many more people have so many more interests. I always joked when I was going up through the corporate ranks before I gave that up for Lent, I always thought, if we stopped playing golf and we could play Halo instead, I'd be an executive by now, but it didn't happen.
I love your humor. It's so subtle and just so on point. I don't know that I've laughed this much on our podcast before. So.
Well, that's why
we need different guests, Hattie.
Well, no. I'm telling you, I was telling the guys we had to have you on because I remember when you didn't have facial hair and you had this book called Trust Agents out. Mm-hmm. And that's at a time when I was thinking about using social media. But one of the things that I liked about the book was that not just about how to use it, but it was funny. It kept my attention and then it was easy to do. And I think I followed you, gosh, that was years ago. And what I like about what you've done now, you have really evolved. And I was looking at your blog post, and the one that stood out for me was the one you put up in January about my 3 words. That's something I have never done before. Mm-hmm. But I went out and created my 3 words for myself, which I think are going to be very helpful to me. Also, influencers, where you say influencers are the devil. That is freaking funny. And, authentic is Satan. And if you could kind of elaborate on that, because I hear people describe themselves in those terms or describe other people in those terms for so long and so much. What's that for you? What does that mean?
Do you know who uses the word authentic? People who don't know how to be authentic. It's the same as the people who have ever introduced themselves to you as a thought leader. You know who's not a thought leader? Anyone who's ever used that expression. Anyone. Can you imagine Elon Musk saying, I lead thoughts? No. He just says, it'd be really cool making an amazing battery company and making you think it's actually a car company. That man sells batteries for a living. That's a not sexy business. And he is bazillionaire wealthy because that man sells batteries in a really cool box that drives pretty fast. So I think with the word authentic, I don't think that people don't aspire to be authentic. I think that people just try to do it in that way. It's like when they say like, quick, act spontaneous. And then you read your notes on how to be spontaneous again. Like it's at the really heart. This is we should have soft music now. There should be like some candles. There should be kind of romantic, not romantic, but like that sort of like he just got done with his last cancer treatment, like that kind of sound. And I'll say to you that what authentic is, there's only two real forces in the whole world. There's fear and there's love. And I mean that because as human primates, you're either going to get eaten or you're going to try to have a baby. That's all we got. That's all we got. We eat things or we try to avoid death. That's all we do. Right. And so our human, like advanced, like, should I or shouldn't I get on TikTok is really, I'm not doing one of those dances. I'm going to look stupid. Fear, man, someone liked my dance. Love, right? That's all we do. That's the only two buttons. So in email marketing, if I write an email that looks kind of boring, you say, this is not a threat to me, so I'm not going to read it. If it looks like everybody else's stupid, safe newsletter, I'm not going to read it. I'm not scared of it. There's no fear there. So I write my newsletters with fear in mind. I want your brain to go, I'm not sure. Should I check? I better check this out, right? You have to be wary. And with love, if you aren't afraid of looking stupid, then you can be authentic. You know who has a fluffy Santa Claus beard? A guy who doesn't care. I could shave this off tomorrow. I shave my head just for entertainment value because I have such long, luxurious locks. I shave them just to make other people who don't have as much hair jealous. Just like, it'll come back later, right? And who does that but someone who's okay? One of the things that they teach you a lot now in like mindfulness and all this thing, and one thing that we can pick up from the pandemic stuff is we don't need nearly as much as we have, right? We all have more than we think we need. And especially people who lost a lot. Like I lost 91% of my revenue because I like to fly and speak at places. Guess what I wasn't doing all of a sudden? So what you learn is that what you need is so much less than what you think. And so you could just call all of that plus on the balance sheet. You could start to be happy again. And if you could be not always necessarily happy, but satisfied, then you can be authentic. You can tell people that you deal with clinical depression, because what's it going to do? Like no one's ever not hired me for clinical depression that I know about. I don't know if you should go on the stage. You might be sad, right? It just hasn't happened that way. But I just feel like once you get more comfortable telling people who you really are, they can't hurt you with it. They can't make fun of it. They can't even counter it, because sometimes they wish they were you because you did something that they didn't do. It's like that beautiful poem, when I am older, I shall wear purple. It's like that every day of your week if you're comfortable with yourself.
How can businesses maybe take that mindset, because there are so many businesses out there, that say you've got to come to the office, you've got to act this way, we need this huge fancy office space, but then the pandemic has taught us you can work from home and just be as effective. Like, how can businesses maybe take that mindset to, get rid of the clutter, actually dial in, focus, and move forward?
Caution, business communicators. I'm going to say political words. After 2020, you can't not be political. You can't, if
Right.
you're choosing not to be political, you're saying, boy, I sure love the worst of this country. And that's how I feel about that. So I think whether or not you did or didn't choose the last US president, what happened over those last few years was a lot of stuff bubbled up to the surface that nobody liked. And there was a lot of side picking that was pretty intense, but more intense and more interesting to me was sideline people who said, I'm not putting my foot in either side of this. So Nike says, you know what, this is silly. And they really boost Colin Kaepernick. And they say, this is the kind of guy we want, because we want all athletes to feel like they're represented and that they're cared about and all that. We're going to put a lot of money into Colin. We're going to make him our poster boy. And a whole bunch of people that had a lot of pretend reasons for why not to like that said, well, that's fine. We'll buy Adidas. And they did. And that's fine. But Nike started making tons more money, because it turned out there were a lot of people who also liked that idea and who also wanted that supported. And so people started voting with their ideologies this year, spending money with their ideologies this year in a huge way. Oh, you support this? Well, then we're not supporting you. Oh, you're saying this? Well, then we're going to take our ball and go home. Airlines started kicking certain people's political members off their planes because they didn't want to be seen as supporting them. Multiple platforms, social network platforms started booting people off left and right, which is, I have a little freedom of speech issue with that, but I'm also happy. But if you weren't down like if you didn't do more than just a black background and a white logo for Black Lives Matter, and you didn't show that you're going to start making your board more BIPOC inclusive, and you didn't show that you were going to do more than hire a chief diversity officer, then you're suddenly starting 2021 and beyond with a disadvantage. We just, LGBTQIA plus stuff, there's so much to be covered now that companies used to just sort of say, well, let's just not bring that to work. Let's just not talk about that at work. You can't not talk about that at work anymore. I think any communicator that's still saying, I don't want that to happen, you're not ready, and you're not ready for what's next. And you're going to have a rough few years if that's how you run your business communications, is if you try to make business not as sterile as you can make it. Zero people want their business environment to be sterile. They just don't want germs.
It's I guess one of the things we try to do with this show is to create the thought process and to get people to think logically and to think before they tweet and understand that words matter, and to understand that if you take the safe route, it's a slow decline to the bottom, and all those other business jargons that go with it. And so I'm grateful of just what you're saying, just as as those kind of things say. I had to go grab a sticker as you were talking earlier, and it's from Willie Nelson. To hell with what people think. Just be who you are, and you'll be happy.
Nothing more true. Look at that man. That man he's had only one path his whole life, and the world conforms and gets around it. So,
how you say, companies are sitting back, but at the same time, there are companies who say they want to have these uncomfortable conversations, and they try to attempt, but once people want to bring that out or bring up certain words, they backpedal. And just from my perspective, I think it's still going to be that way, because when you say, oh, hire a chief diversity officer, and it's always a Black person or in that role, yet you don't give them any power to really do anything, whether it's communicate or to bring people together in a community where they can have these conversations, it's just surface.
Absolutely.
So, it just kind of goes away. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen down the road. Because like I say, I see people putting these action plans together. I see them hiring different types of people and putting them in place. So it's going to be very interesting to see the journey.
There's a lot of theater, just like there was right after 9/11, right? We had a lot of security and safety theater. A guy blows, has a stupid bomb in his shoe, and for the rest of our lives, we're going to have to take our shoes off just because one really weird terrorist made a dopey choice. So with this chief diversity officer, my friends and people of color in Black communities, my friends all shake their head every time they see one, because it's always, like you say, it's almost always a Black woman. So, because we can get two boxes with one, and they're given no power. They're part of HR. All they do is they kind of have this weird little blessing, like, oh, what does the chief diversity officer think? And what does that woman have to say? Okay, I guess that's what you're going to do. Like, it's not ingrained in the company. It's like teaching authenticity, right? And then the other problem that has to happen with regards to, and this is business communications conversation, just in case anyone's panicking. This is it. Like, you have to have these talks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, Austin? I mean, this is what's out there. And if the worst thing a company could say, well, that has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with everybody right now. Look, I was born and raised in Maine. There were 3 Black people in Maine when I was growing up. I didn't even get racism jokes because I didn't have any models for it. But, and now, by the way, massive Somalian population lives there, and everybody had to learn what it was like to really integrate a completely different country of people. What I take from that experience, though, when I learn, what I do and don't know about culture, is it takes a lot of work, and it's not going to be, this doesn't work as easy as putting a mask on, because this is taking a lot of masks off. And in communication, we're taught to try to say things in a way that's safe for our company. And I think it's really smart to stay safe, right? Like, I don't want, I don't want a hamburger, what I want McDonald's to say is that everybody's welcome, or everybody who believes in kindness and love are welcome, right? Because, what we've said a little bit more over the last handful of months is maybe angry people, maybe hateful people, maybe you're not welcome. And I think that there's so much opportunity for that and so much fun to be had in really working on the one word that Joe Biden said in the speech that no inaugural president had said in ages or ever maybe was unity, which why they didn't get Queen Latifah to sing UNITY at that event, I don't know. But I mean, you can't have 100%. They had to put one Lady Gaga in there. But he's right. And the way unity works is that, you know, Zulu, for instance, the Zulu greeting is sawubona, which means I see you. And that's different than hello. Hello doesn't mean anything. It's just a sound out of our mouth. And the hand wave is basically, I don't have a knife or a weapon in my hand. I'm not trying to kill you right now. That's what a hand wave means. That's the historical medieval usage of it. Sawubona is I see you. And the response is Nikhona, I am here. I think we need to see our customers, our prospects, anyone we're going to touch with language. We have to make sure that they know they're seen. Representation matters. Being seen for who you are or what you are, or the thing that you didn't feel comfortable telling anyone you were matters, because the minute you can breathe that full breath of I'm where I belong, people are tired of fitting in. They want to go where they belong.
Kind of reminds me of this YouTube channel, Yes Theory. And Yes Theory, their whole mantra is seek discomfort and loving each other and accepting people for who they are. And I think that's just one of the special things about our world is if you do actually step out of your comfort zone and you do talk with people that are different from you and that have had completely different experiences, whether you grew up in the same neighborhood but maybe had a different family structure, or whether you grew up in Southeast Asia versus Texas where we're from, there's something that you can learn from people. And that's one of the things that kind of has pissed me off about our country the last 4 years is we have this like echo chamber on social media where you've either got this group that is saying, well, you don't agree with me, so I'm going to cancel you, or this other group that is, just refusing to listen and understand. And I don't know that if social media has brought out the worst in people or not. I don't know if people have really changed over the last 40 years. Maybe it's just social media has elevated that, brought it to the surface. But how can we get back to the part where we can have open and honest conversations and not leave the room ticked off with each other, so we can actually hear people, see people like you just alluded to, and move forward?
I mean, there's a lot in that question. We could do a whole episode there and that would be a little less cheery, but there's a lot there. I think that, there's a few weird ones you wouldn't expect though. So there's stuff you'd expect me to say right now. One of them is that curiosity helps a lot. Anytime back in the old days when we could travel, anytime I got into a lift, which is like Uber, except that they like women at Lyft. So anytime I got into a Lyft, I would ask the driver about their culture, because pretty much not likely a straight white man driving a Lyft. It's almost always like the same as taxi companies, right? It's people who just got to the country, language isn't their first thing, and so I would talk to people from Ukraine who would come over, and I'd always ask Ghana, a lot of people from Ghana. And I would always ask the same kind of question, which is, what kind of food would you have at your house? Like if I came over to visit with you and you told mom that I wasn't somebody important, because there's a different food that we put out for important people, but like your college roommate, so that you don't have to impress them, but you have to be nice to them. If I were your college roommate and we came back home, what would we be eating? And I do it every time. I love a question about food, because it's really hard to get in a fight about food. Like, everyone wants to tell you what goes in the belly. And sometimes they make it sound so not interesting, but of course it's always interesting. Some cultures are rice-based, some are potato-based, some are pasta-based, right? You always start with the peasant foods. You start with the filler foods, which is how we can feed more people. And then, but what if it's a celebration? That means there's going to be fish, because that's all you get is fish, right? I think curiosity is one of the most important ingredients there, Austin. And I think the other one is really trying hard. One of the trickiest parts of communication is to make sure you echo and reflect and do such a good job of making sure the other person feels that they really were heard. A lot of, well, I hear you saying this. And by the way, if you do it poorly, you sound like the biggest jerk burger in the world. Like I've wanted to throttle people that say that to me. But if you say it really meaningful, like, I did it the other day. I upset somebody for something. This is any day that ends in Y, I've done this. So I upset someone for something I said. And I said, can I just dig into this for just one more minute? I don't mean to make you even more mad, but do you feel that I said that in some kind of racially uncomfortable way? Or did I say, and she was like, no, I just don't think you know what you're talking about. I said, oh, well, that I'm willing to go for. I said, but if you felt like, if you're here to educate me and you're mad and you're here to educate me, I'm so down for it. If you're just mad, I can't do anything with that. Um, but there's a lot of learning that has to go on in these new discussions, Austin, and you're so right. What's true is that what social media has done different is there's a chorus now. Like in old plays, the person would say something and the chorus would sort of act as the conscience of the people or whatever. So the chorus exists almost entirely to bolster the person that they're there to support. So if you go to YouTube channel, you have all the YouTube faithfuls, and then you have the stranger who wanders in and goes, I don't think that's all that clever at all. And then they get murdered by the other commenters, right? So that's how we use these social platforms. I've heard other people say it. I'll sick my social media people on you. Ooh, I think that's the dopiest thing ever. But if you get the opportunity to say, I'm new here, boy, I've got a lot I'd love to learn. I think that's the trick. I think curiosity, I think echoing, and I guess the third is just to make sure that everyone gets their air. A lot of times we feel like we can't breathe, like the water's right here and our lips aren't above it. We're just like, I can't breathe. There is, think of a phrase to use, right? Think of people's necks. I can't breathe, right? That is a feeling you can get without anybody on your neck. And it is just as bad. It is a bad feeling to have.
When I'm on social media and I see some of the threads that come through, like you were talking about, there's also sometimes just this blatant disrespect.
Truly.
And you're not trying to hear me. You just want to put your little 2 cents out there. And when in communication, even when I'm at work, and if I'm developing some sort of a message for someone, I want to be able to think about, where they're coming from. What's their level of education about the issue? What type of words I need to be using to make sure that I'm not inflaming them, confusing them, or even making sure they even know what they need to be doing. So it just gets that minute to a detail sometimes on the sensitivity, especially when you're working with global audiences and that one message is going to people in different, geographical areas and stuff like that. So, but the one thing I have noticed is that when I'm having a conversation, like we're having a conversation today, that I'm not as hesitant, because whatever you're saying, I'm getting it and I don't feel like it's over my head.
I have a good point. I have a good response to that, I think. I just realized I don't want to say I have a good response. That makes it sound like whatever I'm going to say next is clever. Could not be. Might be bad. Hattie, what you just said made me think this, which is that a lot of times, this goes back to the authenticity thing. We worry that other people don't think we're smart. Humans, by their very nature, tend to worry a lot of times they're not going to think this is important. So we use big words, or we use like really complicated sentence structure, or sometimes we just know the words and we can't help it. We've read a lot, right? One of my favorite words is obfuscate, which is hilarious because it means to kind of make something a little harder to understand. So we maybe know the big words, but it doesn't work so well. I had an old teacher, one of the several colleges I attended, never finished, Ken Hadge, and he said it like this. He said, you know what, when somebody starts using big words and multiple syllables and all that, I always put my hand up. And he says, tell it to me like I'm 6 years old. And he goes, that's the only language I ever want to hear. And whenever I use my WordPress tools to decide my writing level, when I'm writing my blog post and all that, WordPress like, you're a stupid idiot. I'm like, yes, this is great. Like, I wanted to know that I didn't accidentally use words that were too big or sentence structures that were too convoluted. See, even that word's too big. I feel like we think that people can't wait to hear our cool turn of phrase. And by the way, a great turn of phrase is amazing. That's why I listen to a lot of hip hop, but but it stops for me at around 2006, because when people started trying to rhyme A A, A. I was like, that's not rap. But before that, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. Jay-Z, right? I think that there's incredible ways to turn a phrase, but that's different than trying to walk around sounding smart. And I think that you're right, Hattie. I think if you can make it that people feel like they can take it, they can run with it, they can go, then they're not going to, it doesn't go nowhere. It goes somewhere. There's the opportunity. I call it give your ideas handles. So you put a little briefcase around the idea and let them run off and make it theirs. My best work is in other people's mouths and in other people's websites and all that, because they took it and thought they thought it up. Win, because that's communication.
I want to kind of continue down that path. Is what kind of advice would you give to our listeners who run the gamut of levels, from the student all the way to the C-suite, on how would you go about crafting your message for change? Some of them work in the communications department, some of them work in the HR department, some of them work in real estate. Our audience is across the board and across the world too. But what advice would you give for, that first, right out of college, hey, you see something, here's how you kind of help get your message across. That mid-level, here's what you kind of help get your idea across. In your C-suite, how do you better listen?
As far as putting the message together, strive for brevity. Nobody has time for that anymore, right? Strive for clarity. There's a reason. Think about this. There's a reason that we got a lot of news reporting off of Twitter. It's because there's never more than 280 characters. Heck, when I went back in my day, it was 140 characters. But there's brevity and clarity. Look at why is TikTok popular? Because even Snapchat was too long. They're like even shorter. So we love brevity. We love clarity. The other thing is not to use repeated or redigested words. It's amazing how many other people will use other people's quotes and sort of put their message and their strength on somebody else's quote, but then you're just the cover band. You have to create something. So creativity, I guess. The other thing after brevity and clarity is just direct, active, let's get to a call to action. If the message stops, listen to some of the most famous presidential speeches in the world. Ronald Reagan said, you have to ask yourself this one question: am I better off now than I was the last 4 years? And then that's how he won his presidency. One sentence. A certain previous US president, fairly recently, had several 3-word mantras, and his 3-word mantras got him elected. You can't say it any other way. A whole bunch of people can shake their fist and yell 3 words that are all one syllable each. Build a wall, drain the swamp, get her out, right? They're all 3-word, 1-syllable mantras. Everything we've been taught about communications by communications professionals is now old. It's in a new old book that's now called Volume 1. It's time for Volume 2.
How do you stay relevant with Volume 2? Like, how do you find out what's next? How do you continue to push yourself to learn, grow, and adapt?
I recently interviewed a woman whose job is Merriam-Webster, and it's quite interesting. So she makes dictionaries for a living, which I said, so how do you do that? You sit down and you're like, A, okay, here's what A means. And she goes, kind of like that, but it's way more boring and still kind of cool. She's also the resident expert on swear words. So if you watch that Netflix show on swear words, she's on there all the time. We asked that question about being, relevant. We asked, what's up with language? Like, what do you hate the way language is evolving? And she goes, we're not paid to hate it. We're paid to observe and accept that it is true. So like when I watch, my 2 kids, I have 2 kids, one's 15, one is 18 and a half. When I watch them text message me, and they, instead of just being able to be bothered by typing right now, and they just type RN, for a long time, I thought they had nurse friends. So I didn't know. I'm still super not down with emojis. I'm not a big emoji guy. I maybe type old-fashioned emoticons with like a colon and a closed parenthesis for a smiley face. Business people lose their mind if you professionally communicate with that way. Guess what? All humans do, except at business, right? Like we put on our nice let's not swear clothes in one room out of the rest of our entire life, and our whole life is bleeding in on all sides. I think how to stay relevant is not necessarily to use child slang. It is not necessarily to use the social app of the day. But, I was interviewing a really smart mother and daughter this morning, talking about this network connection software that they had just built. and they have an incredible pedigree between the kind of jobs that they came from. And the mom made a joke about GameStop stocks. And I was like, that is today news, you know, and she's of an age that she could be a grandmother, and she still like was right there with the news. You have to stay relevant to today's pulse and convey that in communications. And I think that business people who are afraid of that, even ones who have businesses that are quote unquote traditional, run the risk of losing what makes their business cool. What was one of the most popular brand announcements of this last few months? Burger King went back to their sort of 1970s looking branding, and everyone went, "Oh, this is great," and they praised it. I think it looks horrible. Everyone loves it, but what they're saying is, well, we're doing something different. At least we did that. And I think that compare that to all the other companies that are going to fold under the waters because they didn't communicate anything new or anything unique or anything that said, I'm actually here and vibrant and moving. I make this terrible joke all the time when I'm speaking at conferences that I just used the urinal before I went up on stage because I didn't want to have to pee all through my speech. And I said, the thing is, that urinal knew that I was there. And when I stepped away from it, it knew that I left. But your marketing and your communications doesn't. You don't know I'm there. You act like I came and went. You don't know who I am. You have all this data floating around you, but you can't even tell that a human presence is in the room with you. So the urinal's smarter than your marketing department, which is always a great way to make people feel grumpy. Well, let's change that just a little for comms. Let's say that with communications, you have to be now. You have to be now. You can talk about your heritage, and that's super important for some companies. We've done this for 290 years. Great. But are you here today? What did Eddie Murphy teach us, if nothing? What have you done for me lately, Eddie? Also, Janet Jackson.
Love it.
Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, pardon me.
When I'm doing measurement, that's all the things I'm pushing for is recent, relevant, and actionable. Those are the three metrics that matter. Is it recent? Is it relevant to what we're trying to accomplish? And can we take action on it? If it doesn't meet any of those and it's the, wow, this is really cool, put it in the back pocket, give it to your CEO and let him go.
Thomas, you study a lot of that, don't you? You study you're down for like, how do I know that this worked or didn't work? Because we don't want charlatans leading our communications. Is that your area of expertise?
Well, it's funny because how we kind of sell ourselves is my expertise is actually the marketing. And then I also have a degree in health services research and statistics. So I've been doing marketing measurements before it became a master's degree at universities. But I've always been intrigued at how the world works, why it interchanges, and those random things. I like to say that my mind kind of looks like a beautiful mind, is that if you're able to cut it open, there's a picture here with a red string that goes all the way across the room and a red string over there. And some people are like, do you have your tinfoil hat on today? And I'm like, maybe. Because at the end of the day, to your point, we're either loved or we're acting in fear, but there are measurements that come to that. You know, business is a game, for lack of a better statement, and there are winners and losers. Right now, GameStop is winning, to your point. And so that's where the measurement comes in. And so I guess we could parlay into that is, how do you measure your effectiveness when you're consulting with clients?
Revenue, only and always revenue. Ever since I started doing this, now I have no professional background in anything I do. So you have to start there. You have to realize that I am brought in as the dumbest guy in every room I go into. And I'm paid to be dumb. And one of the things they do is they're like, well, how come we haven't done this? And they all go, oh, maybe we should do that. And a lot of times they tell me, well, we have, it was kind of dumb and it didn't work. And I go, oh, okay. But I only look for measurement and revenue. Did a company start making more money when I did something for them, or didn't they? Did the company themselves start to feel a level of confidence that boosts up? Because, you know, I don't know a good stat for confidence, but I can tell you that the biggest thing that most managers and senior team people are fighting is a chair problem, right? That chair is not comfortable enough and people need to get out of it a lot and wander around. You know, that people are not as engaged. You know, people are measuring things like how fast they answer email right now as an engagement metric for whether or not you're actually doing work from home or you're not. Like, you know, it's the dumbest metric in the world, right? You've just trained someone to be Pavlov dogs to an email. That's like the worst. Email is the perfect delivery solution to other people's challenges. Whatever comes in your box, nothing you wanted to be working on. Like, oh, can't wait for this email, right? That doesn't work. So the stats that I'm looking for is, are we getting money? Are people feeling engaged? Are people having hallway conversations on Zoom or wherever now? Hopefully not Zoom. where they can, talk lovingly about the thing that they're super into. I mean, anytime someone gets jazzy about a business, that's when I've done my thing. That's when I drop my mic and then feel bad and pick it up.
I might be stealing your quote because I've always said that there's only really two measurements that matter. First one is the dollars in, dollars out. And the other one's whatever makes your boss look good.
Oh, you're smart. I'm stealing your second one. So there.
See, it's teamwork. And I'm kind of curious when it comes to building effective teams. Like I think our listeners know that I love sports analogies. And if you're trying to fill out your roster and build a good football team, you've got to play to the strengths. What are the talents? Do you have a running quarterback? Do you have a quarterback with a rocket arm? Do you have, wide receivers that are maybe good blockers and maybe they don't have the speed? How can you leverage the best assets of your team? And Hattie brought this up a few moments ago about your 3 words for 2021. And one of them is options. And to me, that really stuck out. And on options, you said, if your team has too many options, they lose focus and flounder. And if they feel stuck or have a lack of options, they feel pressure and anxiety. And then you said, I survived 2020 because of always seeking the option, looking for a next move. Those next moves kept me housed and fed in 2020, and you'll do even better with your options in 2021. When it comes to building out your team, why are options so incredibly important to find success?
So the other thing I like to say around that is that leadership is basically options management. So you explained it. You explained adding and subtracting options to get there. With team building, so I have direct experience with this in a different career. I worked at the telephone company back when there was the telephone company. You would have had Southwest Bell down your way.
I did, yeah.
I was at 9X, which was New York, New England, and the Unknown, which was originally New England Telephone. I worked at their directory assistance office, which doesn't exist for people under a certain age. This is before there was an internet. You had to ask another human being for someone's phone number if you didn't have a phone book. So when I managed 411 call centers for directory assistance, it's call center management. When I managed it, I had some younger people who were the fastest typists in the world and who had brain facility to remember all kinds of information that they didn't have, even though they were looking it up, they were masters at finding it, in the sort of search system. And then I had really lovely older people who had 30 something years in the business or 29 years in the business, and they were just trying to get to 30 to retire. And they were lovely. And they were super great at customer service. They were super nice. My young people, not always nice. So what would happen is call centers are all based on one stat, which Thomas will love. It's average response time, average handling time. So AHT, call centers live or die by AHT, because call centers are an expense. So what I would do is I would have my fastest people go super fast so that I could keep my oldest people being super nice. And that way my team worked wonderfully. So I wouldn't be as mean to my fast people if they weren't the best customer service people. And I didn't mind that my older people couldn't meet the average handling time requirement of the office. Any individual in my team of a certain age just almost always, and there were some exceptions, by the way. I had a really fast old lady and I had a super nice young person, but it just sort of in my calculus in my head, that's my 2 buckets. And I had one of the best average handling times in the entire office. We had three separate managers and I had the fastest of all 3. Our office started seeming as a whole faster than other offices. And I got called up to regional to explain how I did it. And they were like, oh, back when, bureaucracy was cool. So how does that translate to any business? How does it translate to any comms? Let people do the thing that they're doing really well. And really build around that. And what that means, though, is every time you're building a team, you're sort of building a band. Some bands work great with 2 lead singers. Lots of bands do not, with quarterbacks, right? So I'm born and raised in New England. And for a very long time, it was great to like the Patriots because they were underdogs, just like all our other teams. None of our sports teams in Boston did well. Occasionally, we'd get the Stanley Cup for hockey. And then stupid Brady comes along and stupid Brady wins everything he can ever win. And for years and years and years, the Patriots, like, people hate that guy. And what Belichick had been doing as a guy was he knew he had that and he was never going to not work that. But he worked all the rest of his team around building that system around that. And some teams work that way. The Boston Celtics, I'm just going to go with your wanting of analogies of sports, good ball. Celtics had this thing where no one was ever the star. Everyone passed. So in the 1980s Boston Celtics, Larry Bird was not as important as anybody else. He was just the same team, right? You know Larry, Indiana boy. So he was not the star that Magic was. He was not the star that Jordan was when Jordan came up. He was just a really good folksy guy who passed the ball a lot. And so I think that's what needs to happen in teams is you've got to let your singers be their singers and let the drummer hide in the back and all that sort of thing. And I think that we do so many weird things in hiring processes, don't we? When it comes to comms people, what you need them to be is shiny. They have to be someone who can really produce fast, because someone who's really thorough and takes forever is not a good, useful person in comms. So what if you have a really good, useful, thorough person? Great. Have them be the editor. Don't have them produce. Have them be the one who once overs things. You know where I want my chief diversity officer to sit? In comms. I want them to be the person who makes sure you don't say dumb things out, and you don't have to send an apology later. I don't remember who recently just did it again, where you just like, oh, Apple with their Apple Watch, that crazy African Apple Watch that they just made. There couldn't have been a person of color in that room, right? It could not have been. And all of a sudden they chewed on in public again for yet another easily fixable issue. And so I want my team to look like that. Did that answer a little too many words, Austin?
I think that's wonderful. Okay. I think you hit the nail on the head. And for our listeners out there, I hope you can take some of, Chris's thoughts and let your team shine. Play to your strengths. I think it's so important to have a well-rounded team. You can't have robots. If you want to succeed, you've got to have diversity of thought, diversity of talent, diversity of experience. And I think that there's something that we can all learn from one another. That's the thing that kind of I've enjoyed, being able to be a part of IBC Houston is there are people at different levels. They could be the most senior person, they could be a C-suite executive, and there could be somebody that's just coming out of college and so eager to learn, and they can learn from each other. They can sit down, have coffee. There's a guy in IBC, his name's Ben Wheatley, and he is, he's been a communicator here in Houston since, probably the 1970s. And we had a conversation probably 2 years ago. He wanted to meet for coffee. Said it would be about 15 minutes. We ended up staying there for 2 hours, just chatting and sharing ideas. And I thought it was so fun because we were able to learn about each other and learn from each other. Needless to say, I think the lesson here is ask questions, get out of your comfort zone, find people that you can connect with and build lasting connections. Don't do it just to check a box. I think we've got to develop these personal relationships and not really be distant. Let's get together while we are social distancing, while we are fighting the, COVID vaccine, or while we are fighting COVID-19. Don't just send an email, pick up the phone, call people, try to bring that personal connection back. I think that's so important.
Before COVID, get off, push away from the desk and go to their desk and actually have a conversation.
Yeah.
There's a business management student who's written some incredible works, in R.V. Winkle. And what he said was, all right, stop, collaborate, and listen. And what he says is that, that's how you're going to bring a brand new invention. Like you can't get new stuff if you don't stop, collaborate, and listen. So I think that, don't forget this. One thing Austin said twice now was something about, from the, the lowly student to the CEO. If you're not a student, you're a dead person. Yep. If you're not a student, you're a dead person. So I hope the CEO is also a student. And I always, you could tell by my sort of, aw shucks, the way I say things about myself, I always am learning. I don't ever give myself any credit for knowing anything, mostly because I don't know anything. And so I think that just follow the words of Mr. Winkle.
I love the Vanilla Ice reference. That's my go-to song at karaoke. So little behind the peek behind the curtain there for our audience.
Nice, Austin. Here's a question for you. As you're talking about stop, collaborate, and listen, and this is how it goes. How do you keep yourself motivated? How do you find your influence Where does your creativity come from? As we're all students and continue to learn, we always have that go-to. I always like to say when I'm looking for people to do different tasks, if they were an email writer and they're trying to break into more of the digital marketing, ad buying, I know that when times get tough, they're going to swing back to their email writing stuff. But how do you stay involved and stay relevant?
I have two answers to that. One is a small story. If HubSpot headquarters here in Boston, if you go to HubSpot headquarters, they had this thing for a while, and I haven't been there in a few years, but they were started to paint the walls with that whiteboard paint, which I think is the coolest thing ever made. But what they did was like, that stuff's expensive. So they did like every other wall with whiteboard paint, which sounds kind of okay until you think about the fact that they're both white. All the walls are all the same color. So one day in a fit of enjoyment and jubilation, this person comes running up with a marker and goes, "Why hasn't anyone?" And someone stopped them right then and there because they were writing on the regular wall, the not whiteboard wall. And so that was up. The last time I ever walked in that door, the words "Why hasn't anyone?" were still written in pen on the wall, and they had to paint it over it, of course. And I argued and argued and argued for them not to paint over it. I said they should put a frame around it, because there is no better question for curiosity and creativity and growth than why hasn't anyone? That is a beautiful start to learning anything. Why hasn't anyone made a better way to socialize and network when we're on these stupid Zoom calls? Zoom chat is surely not it, right? So why hasn't anyone made it better? And I just met a company who does that today. So that's one. The other thing I always try to do, and this is Andrea Cates or Yates, I always forget her name and I always feel bad because I say the wrong one, wrote a book called Find Your Next. And what she talked about was she went to places like KFC and taught them what she was learning from a kindergarten class in like Tucson. And so she's always looking for, find a different vertical and learn from that vertical in that space. If you're not going to learn great email marketing from an email marketer. You're going to learn it from a stand-up comic. You're going to learn it from an incredible lyricist. You're going to learn it from somebody who does an incredible thing with words. I interviewed this guy yesterday, Casey Taylor. Casey Taylor's job title, like what he does, he's a VP at this company that like helps musical artists get paid. You know how like music just sort of floats around and nobody really knows what to do. He's building this like crazy intense system to make sure that every little penny gets sent to the right person. Boring, kind of cool, but like I want to talk to him about that. He was so funny. And so we had him on to talk about just his growing up. And he said this one thing. He was talking about he goes, "I remember this vividly. It was one of my first years at junior high. It might've been like I was sixth grade or something. My dad, I'm sitting in his 1978 Plymouth Duster or whatever, very specific. And he said, and those red vinyl seats, those red vinyl bench seats, kind of a little used in spots where the springs are a little bent. And he said to me, "Son, just remember, it's okay to be weird and not everybody's the star." And he went, "Okay, Dad." And he goes, I was this big fat kid. My clothes didn't even fit. And he goes, "I jumped off the bench seat onto the sidewalk and I had my little backpack with rolly wheels behind it." And he said, that's how it went. That's a vivid story. And all I thought afterwards, as I was dissecting how he spoke, it was always the detail. He didn't say we'd go to dinner. He would say, so we were having this steak and lasagna kind of mixed meal or whatever. Or he would say, I got a Fanta, and I'm particular to grape Fanta because there's no other Fanta in my mind, right? He'd say these things and you'd think grape Fanta and you'd see the bottle. You'd almost see the sweat of the droplets. So Thomas, those are my two answers. Number one, you got to go to, weird places to find it. So I found Casey Taylor. And then the other is just always, why hasn't anyone?
Well, Chris, it's been an absolutely fascinating hour conversation with you, and so thankful and gracious that you gave us the time just to converse with you. And we wish that we could continue to go on, but we're not Joe Rogan. We can't do the 3.5 hour podcast because we still have to be able to edit. But one day, when we do get there, we'll have you back on, and hopefully in person, at a magical studio or something like that. But really quickly, for our listeners out there that maybe you want to get in touch with you, follow your work, listen to your podcast, pick out your 10th book. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life and where they can connect with you.
So we just launched, I have a video show that I started back in March, and I just launched a standalone website for that. And for fun, I would love you to go look at that because I think it's pretty. It's called thebackpackshow.online. So the .online top level domain is the sponsor of it, which is why I use .online. And they were really nice people. So the backpackshow.online. If you don't remember any of that, just chrisbrogan.com. That's my own site that I made myself for entertainment value. What's up? What's new? I don't know. Everything. I have a newsletter that I put out every Sunday. And if you thought this was vaguely entertaining, my newsletter is about 1/40th as entertaining, and maybe you like it.
I like it.
Thank you, Addie.
I like it too. Also follow him on Twitter as well. Great Twitter follow, and can't wait to see what you continue to create moving forward, Chris. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Business Communicators.
I feel so honored. I feel like we should all go to Whataburger.
Let's do it. I'm glad you're down with Whataburger. That's speaking to our hearts. Speaking to our hearts.
Texan thing there.
My first trip to Houston, baby.
Let's do it.
Can I tell a really quick story? So here I am. The people who brought me to this particular place, they were very, I'll just say cheap. It'll make the story faster. Very cheap. So they put me in this really not good hotel, like a 1.5 star would probably be nice. And so I was in that, those parts of Houston where you're like, we'll get to that later. Like that's how like the city designed it. They were just like, So I'm over there underneath some overpass near an underpass and also some through passes or something. And there's a Whataburger kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's like a massive concrete, desert in every direction, and a Whataburger there, almost like it's a training ground for missiles or something. There's just nothing anywhere around. Like nothing can get hurt. You could blow the building up, put another one back. Who would know? So I go in there. This goes back. This ties to the racial diversity kind of a thing. I walk in the door of the place, and I am the only, for the first time in my life. Now, this is something people of color get to experience plenty of times. They go to an event, they go to a conference, they go to a meeting. They're the only person of color. I am the only guy, which I think to myself, I hope this is a delicious burger. But I also think maybe I'm not even supposed to be here. Like maybe I've missed a law or a rule or something. Maybe I'm not where I'm supposed to be, which is a feeling I think people get when they are the only. So it's almost like in movies when a piano player stops and all the music stops and everyone turns and looks at the door and sees me there, less beard. But like I'm a Viking, I'm like 6'2" and I look vast, and they all are just looking me over like, And so I just say, I just want to get a burger. Like, is that cool? Can I get a burger? I'm like, yeah, come on in. And then the noise all starts back up. It's wonderful. I had a great time. Sat and talked to people, learned all kinds of stuff. Everybody's super hospitable. I was absolutely the only, but I'm like, so I'm a Boston guy. I don't know what this Whataburger's about. What do I got to know? And they were like, you're already doing it, man. You already picked the right thing. You already got the food. So it was a grand experience. It was the only good thing I could tell you about Houston during that trip, because it was me, that, and a stage where it was a trade show. So I got to talk to really nice people who could have cared less what I was doing.
We are going to bring you back to Houston. Maybe we can get
do
you
it
for.
Up. Can we do it up?
Yeah, we'll bring you back for maybe I don't know, an in-person luncheon that we have with IBC Houston. Thomas, Hattie, and I will take you out to dinner the night before, and we'll have a good old time. We'll paint the town with so many different colors, whiskey, beer, all that good stuff. But we'll have a good time. But Chris Brogan, thank you so much for joining us on the Business Communicators.
My honor. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators.